Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This video is gonna be kind of special because it's a first for me. I am making a vegan cake. For those who know me, you know how much I stay away from vegans because, not vegans, I meant vegan recipes, not vegans themselves. Vegans are lovely people. So I stay away from vegan recipes because I swear by eggs and butter, and I come across a lot of vegan recipes that just simply replace the butter with margarine, and I don't like using margarine. Anyway, it's my cousin's birthday and she is vegan, and so I thought, you know what, I'm gonna challenge myself. And loads of you asked me for a vegan recipe, so if this one works, I will happily share it, and I will put all the details below. So this recipe I found on Domestic Gothess. The reason why I've chosen this recipe is because I noticed that it just didn't have a lot of scary ingredients, or expensive ingredients for that matter. So it's going to be a nice chocolate cake with a chocolate ganache, and instead of using cream, we're using coconut milk. So from the sounds of it, sounds good. First thing I'm gonna do is get some almond milk. So I'm using almond milk. If you want to keep this cake nut-free, then go for oat or rice milk. I presume it acts as the same thing. And I'm just going to put the cider vinegar into the milk and whisk it in. And apparently it's meant to curdle the milk slightly, so we'll see if that happens. So I can't really see any obvious curdling happening, but I'm also going to go in with some sunflower oil, so any flavourless oil, just not olive oil basically, and the caster sugar, and mix that all in. So it's basically mixing together the wet ingredients and the caster sugar. And one last thing into the wet ingredients is just some vanilla paste. Okay, so wet ingredients done. Already, this is slightly different to my normal sponge cake recipes, but I'm excited. So into a bowl, I'm going to sift together plain flour, cocoa powder. There's quite a lot of cocoa powder in this recipe. When I make a recipe for a 6-inch cake, I only use about 25 grams, and there's 80 here. So I'm imagining it to be quite chocolatey and heavy. Also, just a tip, use a good quality cocoa powder because we're not putting actual chocolate into the sponge, and I don't do that with my own cakes. The flavour is going to come from the cocoa powder, so the better quality the cocoa powder, the better tasting the cake. Going to add the bicarb of soda and baking powder together, and then a pinch of salt. So that's roughly 1/4 teaspoon. And I'm going to sift that together. Now, as you know, I don't usually sift my flour, but cocoa powder does need sifting. It's usually very lumpy, so I'm just going to push the last bit through with a spatula. So dry ingredients in the bowl, and now I'm going to put the wet ingredients in. I'm going to mix it together with a whisk, just to make sure that it's all mixed in very evenly. So I'm not incorporating air with the whisk. I'm just making sure I get a nice smooth batter. It's a really wet mixture. Maybe that's a good thing because there are obviously no eggs. So you need kind of that extra moisture. So I'm just going to do the last bit of mixing with a spatula just to make sure everything's folded through. And actually, as I've mixed it, the batter has got thicker. So it must have been the flour and the cocoa powder really absorbing all that liquid. But actually, this looks like a normal cake batter. So I've got high hopes. Now, the recipe says to divide it into 3 tins to get a nice tall cake. So rather than splitting it into 2 and then cutting them in half, I'm going to stick to what the recipe says. And I'm going to measure how much batter goes into each tin. And I basically calculated all the ingredients together and then divided them by 3. And it's roughly 360 grams per tin. So I'm going to start with that as a guide. So 3 evenly filled tins. They're going in the oven, at a preheated oven, at 180 degrees Celsius or slightly lower if your ovens get too hot, for around 30 minutes. So I'm going to check them after 30, and hopefully they'll feel like a normal sponge cake, but I'm feeling good about this. So this cake is going to be filled with a ganache. Now usually ganache is made with double cream and chocolate, but this recipe uses coconut milk instead. So again, this is one of the reasons why I chose this recipe, because I think it just sounds the nicest. The only thing I'm a little hesitant about, but we'll see when the cake's done, is coconut has a really powerful flavour. So I wonder how much you'll be able to taste the coconut. And if you do, I'm sure it will be delicious because chocolate and coconut go really well together, but maybe I'll call it a chocolate coconut cake because you will taste the coconut. Anyway, I have some dark chocolate that I have chopped up into small pieces. So vegan dark chocolate, you might start thinking like, oh my God, I need to go to a specialist vegan place. Actually, supermarket owned dark chocolate doesn't have milk in. In fact, a lot of dark chocolate doesn't. It just has it in the allergens, so it's more of an allergy thing. So you don't have to go to a specialist place if you want to keep it dairy-free or vegan. So I've just got regular dark chocolate, which comes in a bar, and because I want it to melt quicker, I've chopped it up into small pieces. And I have heated up some coconut milk. Now the recipe specifies canned coconut milk. So I have used canned coconut milk, and I have heated it until it is steaming. And like a normal ganache, I'm just going to pour this on top of the chocolate. So I'm just going to leave that standing just for a little bit before I start mixing it. So I've left it for a couple of minutes, so hopefully the heat of the cream has started melting the chocolate. So with a spatula, I'm just going to slowly mix it through. I can really smell the coconut. It smells delicious. It will just be interesting to see how much of the flavour comes through with the rest of the cake. But that is looking beautiful and silky. So now this needs to set in the fridge. The recipe recommends 2 hours, sometimes longer. I'm going to wait for the cakes to cook, cool them completely, and then wrap them in cling film and decorate them in a few hours. So if you're in more of a rush, maybe start with the ganache first and get that in the fridge or even freezer and then cook the cakes, whereas I'm doing it the other way around. So I'm just going to cling film the bowl so it doesn't get any form of skin, and then pop this in the fridge for it to set and then check on my cakes. Okay, so I ended up cooking my sponge cakes for 35 minutes. I checked after 30 minutes and they just felt a little bit soft still. So I gave it an extra 5 minutes and they still felt soft, but I realized there's no egg in the batter. So it's not like you're waiting for the egg component to cook. They're kind of safe to eat, I suppose. So I inserted a skewer, which I don't usually do, but that's what the recipe said, and it came out clean. And they do feel quite, sturdy inside. But the recipe also says to leave them in the tins for 30 minutes before taking them out. So maybe that just adds an extra kind of stabilizing element. Because there's no egg, an egg usually binds cakes. So I'm going to leave them to cool, then take them out the tins and probably wrap them in cling film just to make sure that they're nice and fresh for when I decorate it. So first initial thoughts, just from touching the sponges, they do actually feel cakey. They have a spongy feel to them. They obviously haven't risen that much, and I reckon that's because of the absence of egg. Saying that, I'm not going to cut these in half again. So I'm going to leave them to cool, and before I build up the cake, I will level them off, and I'll also be able to taste it. They do smell amazing, and they're really rich and dark, so no wonder they are called a chocolate fudge cake. So I will be back in a couple of hours to decorate these sponges with the chocolate ganache that I made earlier. So it's been a couple of hours and I've had my ganache sitting in the fridge, and I went to test it and it looked pretty firm. I think it just needed a few more minutes. So I've actually popped it in the freezer while I prepare the cakes. Now the cakes are obviously completely cooled and I wrap them in cling film, and so I'm just going to unwrap them. What I'm going to do is keep one slightly domed for the top, but flatten the others. And I can feel already how sticky they are, and actually some of the cake has just stuck to the surface, which I suppose is a good sign because they're nice and moist, but I might just grab myself a chopping board just in case. And what I'm going to do is just even out the very top of it. Now it is quite sticky, so I'm going to try and do my usual cutting technique, but might be a little trickier. Wow. So it actually feels really good. It feels really moist, but it is very crumbly, and I think that's because of the lack of egg in it and it's not holding together, which is probably why the recipe calls for 3 separate cakes and then not to do them in half, because I think good luck to anyone trying to cut that in half. But I am going to take this opportunity to try it. Oh wow, it's really moist, really dense. It's a fudge cake. It's got that like fudginess to it. It's not like light and airy and bouncy. It's quite dense and moist. It's actually really good. But yeah, not a normal sponge, but a pretty good one. I'm impressed. So I'm just going to prepare one of the other cakes. Ooh, a little bit broke off, so it's not the best cake to cut. So maybe I shouldn't have leveled it, but because it's a stacked cake, I want it to be nice and level. Definitely going to keep the offcuts for me, but I was considering making a soaking syrup for this cake just because I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but actually it's really dense and moist, and you can actually see how wet and sticky it is because it's actually leaving crumbs on my fingers, but they're also delicious. And the last layer I'm going to leave domed. To be honest, it looks like a normal sponge. It tastes really good. So at the moment, I'm impressed. So I've got my layers prepared and I'm going to check on that ganache. So the ganache has actually firmed up really nicely. It's really silky and smooth. I'm just a little worried it's still a bit loose. It actually looks perfect consistency to kind of pipe the middle of macarons or something. So I'm actually just going to give it a good mix to even out the cold temperature, and then I'm going to pop it back in the freezer, I think for another 5-10 minutes, because the last thing I want is to be building up the cake and it moving everywhere. But before I do this, I want to try the cake with the ganache because I'm desperate to try it. A little amount. Wow, that's really good. I'm not just saying it. I was actually expecting to say I didn't like it. But it's really good. I was worried about that coconut flavour in the ganache, and I can hardly taste it because I think the chocolate's so overpowering. And the ganache is actually quite light, so compared to the dense chocolate cake, it's a really good balance. So great. I'm going to pop this back in the fridge and then hopefully it'll be firm enough to build up and finish the cake. So I've just got the ganache out the freezer and it's a lot thicker. So to be honest, it's still soft, but I'm going to keep the cake in the fridge, not the fridge. I'm going to keep the cake in the fridge until I serve it tomorrow. So it should be fine. So I'm going to go on with my first layer of cake. Now, the cake is kind of falling apart a bit. So it does make me think that when I'm thinking of using this recipe for a big tiered cake, I don't think it has the same structure. So I'm just going to keep the decoration of this quite simple, like on the blog I found it. I'm just going to go on with a dollop of the ganache. And spread it out. So I think this word is overused, but it's going to have a little bit of a rustic feel to it. Going to go on with the second layer. And some more ganache. And then finally the top layer. And then with another dollop of ganache on the top. I'm kind of a bit scared of spreading it so much, but it actually looks like it's holding its shape. I was also getting worried that my cake layers looked quite flat, but actually stacking them up with the ganache, they don't look flat at all. And I've got some fresh fruit just to decorate the top. This actually looks really pretty and really chocolatey. So I am really impressed. I think it just needs one more thing, just a little dusting of icing sugar. I love doing this on top of fruit especially. So, verdict, not bad at all. I'm surprisingly impressed by that sponge. I love how dark and dense it is, and the ganache is also really lovely, really smooth and silky, and you can't taste the coconut. It's just a really great cake. So I've overcome my fear of doing vegan. I must admit though, it does feel, it feels like it doesn't have a structure, and it makes a lot of sense because eggs especially in a cake give it structure. So I think it's just lacking in that slightly. So I don't think I could do such crazy big layered cakes with it. Saying that, it was fun to make, easy to make, didn't use one mixer, and I hope my cousin likes it because I certainly did. So try it out, I'm gonna put the link below. If you have any suggestions for other videos that you want me to see, or even me trying things out that I haven't done or don't usually do, then right below. In the meantime, please subscribe to my channel. Lots more videos coming soon. Give it a thumbs up and I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you very soon.